Okay, we're going to look at combining logical um, operators. We'll also recap on the not unary operator as well. And we're going to take the concept of getting married within the UK. Okay, so there are various rules that determine that. Excluding Scotland, you either need to be over 18 or you need to be over 16 and have your parents' consent. Or you can be over 16 but in Scotland. Okay, so we'll ask the user some questions to determine that, and then we'll create some a combination of if and or statements to ensure that we can determine if someone could be permitted under the law to get married. Okay, so we'll start by asking them. I would also not to get married. Yeah, you can't already be married. So we'll ask all those questions. So first question we're going to ask is, are you already married? Okay, and we'll ask them to type true or false in this occasion. We've already got the scanner imported, but we need to actually create an instance of it. So we'll create an input scanner. And we'll read in a boolean for already married. And we'll just clear that next line that'll be sitting there. Okay, so we've determined if they're already married. We also need to determine if they are over 16. Okay, so we will ask them if they're over 16. Okay, now obviously if they are over 16, that they're by default not necessarily over 18, so it might actually be better to ask if they're over 18 first, and then only ask them if they're over 16 if they're not already over 18. So let's just do that. I should say 18. By over 18, we take it to mean 18 or over in reality. Now, what we can do is we can essentially create the boolean for over 16 and then modify its value based on whether or not the user's over 16 if they've answered false to the over 18. Okay, so let's just quickly do that. Let's say the boolean for over 16 is actually going to be set to false. However, actually, let's set it to true, but then we'll ask again and reset its value. So if they're over 18, if they're not over 18, then we'll ask them here if they're over 16. And because this over 16 boolean value now already exists, we can remove the declaration for it, and we can just change its value to the response to if they're over 16. Okay, so if they say false to this, it'll be set to false. Okay, and we don't ask them because if they're already over 18, we don't need to ask them. Okay, and then we finally got to find out if they've got their parents' consent and or if they're in Scotland. So do you have parental consent? And then we can create a boolean value consent, which is going to read in a Boolean. And then finally, we can ask if they're in Scotland. Okay, so the requirements for getting married, okay, are that you're not already married, and that applies in all cases. So you can say if not married, okay, they're not already married, okay, but in addition to that, they have got to either be over 18 or, okay, and we'll put some brackets in here, so that either over 18 or they are over 16 with parental consent, or they are over 16 and in Scotland. Okay, so if we look at the brackets here, we're checking that they're either over 18, they're either over 16 with consent, or they're over 16 and they're in Scotland. And in all those instances, okay, they are not already married. And we can upload a message, you may get married. And then just for completeness, you are not permitted to get married. Okay, so let's run that to test it. We can start off with the are you already married? Well, obviously if we say false to that, no matter what we say to everything else, oh, we have an error in our code. So let's evaluate why we've got that error. So it's saying we can get married. Oh no, we've answered that we are not already married. So obviously if we're not married, we can get married if the other criteria are met. Let's run it again and actually say this time that we are married, and we should find that we won't be permitted. So obviously I'm already married, but despite the fact I'm over 18 with consent and potentially in Scotland, I'm not permitted to get married. And let's try some of the other options. So obviously we can't already be married, okay, but we're not going to be over 18, but we are over 16, and we don't have parental consent, but we are in Scotland, so that should allow us to get married, and therefore we may get married. And if we run it again, this time we won't be in Scotland, but we will have consent. Obviously not already married. We're not over 18. We are over 16. I can't remember what we said last time. We'll say that we do have consent, but we're not in Scotland, and we may get married. And then finally, just to test, regardless of consent, as long as we're not married, if we are over 18, even if we've not got consent and we're not in Scotland, we may still get married. Okay. So it's a case of evaluating what happens in brackets first, then evaluating what happens with all the or statements, which are again wrapped inside brackets, and then we check with the and as well. And bear in mind we're using the not operator here to check that we're not already married.